This is Mac OS Ken.
Signs of strength for iPhone. Apple is going for it with Emancipation and 100 million songs in your pocket. It is Tuesday, the 4th of October, 2022. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and sponsored by Ladder. Smart, dynamic term life insurance. Learn more at ladderlife.com/macosken. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macosken. Far be it from me to argue with the late, great Tom Petty, but waiting is easy. A lot of times there's really nothing else you can do. The song might more accurately say, the waiting is the annoyingest part, though it's not terribly melodic. Plus, the little red line in Pages tells me that annoyingest isn't actually a word. Whatever, waits are lengthening for iPhones. Not all iPhones, but more than the world expected a week ago. Call to Mac has been poking around Apple orders. They're finding going for either an iPhone 14 Pro or iPhone 14 Pro Max means maybe not getting your new phone until November. Checking myself, had I ordered an unlocked 128GB deep purple iPhone 14 Pro on Monday, I'd be looking at delivery between the 26th of October and the 2nd of November. Do the same again with an iPhone 14 Pro Max, and the dates stretch a week, landing in my hands between the 2nd of November and the 9th. Back to the cult. That site has also poked into the iPhone 14 Plus queue. I told you yesterday that my check of Apple's site showed orders for Apple's biggest phone at the consumer end starting to slip in the States. Since pre-orders began, iPhone 14 Plus has shown delivery available on the model's release date this Friday, the 7th of October. My check over the weekend showed that delivery had started to slip. Had I ordered Sunday, Apple was showing delivery running between the 11th of October and the 13th. Call to Mac spotted the same wait on Monday, showing the same delivery times, according to the report. JP Morgan analyst Samik Chatterjee is out with some really interesting iPhone numbers. Apple 3.0 ran part of a note he wrote, which had a stack of good news from Apple's perspective. Pulling points from Chatterjee's survey of 500-plus people in the U.S., U.K., and China, intent to upgrade is up this year compared to last, with 75% of current iPhone owners planning to do so this year versus last year's 65%. While the number of people intending to switch to iPhone is about the same as last year, what they're dropping and what they're looking for is interesting. They're dropping Samsung and Huawei, according to Chatterjee's survey. What they're looking for is 5G. Besides that, the piece says drivers of upgrade are less specific this year. The iPhones folks find most interesting are iPhone 14 Pro Max and, surprisingly, iPhone 13. Chatterjee says that's true among both switchers and upgraders. The 13 is doing better this year than the 12 did last year, according to the survey, likely thanks to economic uncertainty. The analyst says he and his conclude that more price-sensitive customers are looking to opt for the iPhone 13 rather than the more expensive iPhone 14 Plus. On Apple Watch, folks looking to upgrade from an older Apple Watch are split between Apple Watch Series 8 and Apple Watch Ultra. As for people considering their first Apple Watch, Chatterjee says 2/3 are looking to the Series 8. And finally, Chatterjee says reasons not to buy are expectedly price. That is the primary reason holdouts are holding out on both iPhone and Apple Watch, according to the survey. Mr. Chatterjee has an overweight rating on Apple shares. His price target on the shares is $200. Annoyances in iOS 16.0.2 should be a thing of the past soon. That is the word from MacRumors. It's not that they'll be gone necessarily. Any that remain, though, will be annoyances of iOS 16.0.3. According to the site, evidence of an upcoming iOS 16.0.3 software update has shown up in MacRumors analytics logs, which have been a reliable indicator in the past. Bugs that users might hope to see squished include an issue with low volume on CarPlay calls using iPhone 14 Pro, display flickering on some iPhones with the brightness turned down, a mail crashing vulnerability, and a problem editing cinematic mode videos shot on iPhone. Actually, there are more bugs than that, but those are the ones they listed. Remember, kids, it's not just you. There's no official indication as to when Apple might release the little bug killer. MacRumors expects it'll be either this week or next week, since iOS 16.1 is also expected this month. As new models fill the hearts, minds, palms, and cases of iPhone users, pour one out for a giant of the line. Called to Mac says iPhone 6 has hit Apple's vintage list. iPhone 6 was notable for a few reasons, both good and bad. On the bad side, Bendgate. The cult says that model was one of the largest phones ever from Apple and was more prone to being accidentally bent than its predecessors. On the good side, the piece says iPhone 6 was Apple's answer to those wanting a larger display. It took the display from 4 inches to 4.7 and took iPhone sales through the roof. Now, 5 years after leaving Apple's lineup, it hits the vintage list. Not dead, but not at all well, as Monty Python might say. If you're rocking an iPhone 6, you can still get it worked on by Apple or Apple-authorized service providers, provided they have the parts to keep it working. For a good bit of the summer, Evercore analyst Amit Daryanani tracked declining sales in Apple's App Store. Now picking up the theme is Morgan Stanley analyst Eric Woodring. CNBC ran a piece Monday that had Katie Huberty's Apple following replacement, saying App Store revenue fell in September as people slowed down on game spending. That is the biggest drop for App Store revenue since Morgan Stanley started tracking that in 2015. It's probably actually the biggest drop ever. Evercore's Daryanani said in September that the decline in App Store revenue he spotted in August was the first ever decline since the store opened in 2008. As for last month's drop, Woodring says we believe the recent App Store results make clear that the global consumer has somewhat de-emphasized App Store spending in the near term as discretionary income is reallocated to areas of pent-up demand. Bad news for the App Store and some developers, though Apple's services segment is still expected to grow despite the lack of app sales. CNBC says Morgan Stanley expects Apple's total services revenue to show an 8% increase in the September quarter. The piece points out that subscriptions and Apple Care also turn up under Apple's services segment. More news in a moment, but first a word from Ladder, smart, dynamic term life insurance and sponsor of today's show. We talked yesterday about how term coverage life insurance is not one of those things you should put off. Of course, yesterday was Monday, so you probably did. It's busy getting into the swing after the weekend. Today, you're back to your normal schedule, which doesn't normally include shopping for life insurance, and before you know it, it's the weekend, and who wants to spend the weekend worrying about life insurance? If you need it, this is really something you can't put off. You've got stuff for your loved ones taken care of right now. College, mortgage, life stuff. If something goes wrong, though, what happens to that care? Now is the time to choose life insurance through Ladder. Ladder is 100% digital. No doctors, no needles, no paperwork when you apply for $3 million in coverage or less. You just need a few minutes and a phone or a laptop to apply. Ladder's smart algorithms work in real time, so you will find out if you are instantly approved. There's always going to be a reason to put this off. The reasons to not put it off are more important. So go to ladderlife.com/macOSKen today to see if you are instantly approved. That's LADDER life.com/macOSKen. ladderlife.com/macOSKen. You know, Tim Cook is really seeing all the sights on his trip through the UK and Europe. Battersea Park, AFC Richmond, the Pope. I'd love to meet his travel agent. CNET says Apple CEO met Pope Francis in Vatican City. Mr. Cook was granted a private audience with the pontiff. As is customary, the piece says the Vatican did not disclose what was discussed during the private meeting, so I think we should make up what they talked about. CNET linked to a Yahoo Finance piece that had the Pope complaining about the prevalence of smartphones over personal communication a few years ago. It's possible they talked about that. I like to think he was having trouble with his iPhone, the Pope was. So he called Apple, then asked to speak to the manager, then asked to speak to their manager, and eventually got to Tim. Maybe the Pope has an idea for an app. Feel free to take a turn, by the way. info@macosken.com. So it looks like Apple is going to go for it with the Anton Fuqua, Will Smith historical drama, Emancipation. Not only did the film get its first official screening last weekend, it's got a couple of release dates. A piece from the Mac Observer says the screening took place on Saturday in Washington, D.C., It was presented during the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's 51st Annual Legislative Conference. For those who have forgotten, the film, based on a true story, follows Peter, a runaway enslaved person in search of his family. Eventually, TMO says Peter joins the Union Army. It was during a medical examination when doctors discovered the scars on Peter's back, which he had suffered at the hands of a plantation overseer. Peter's scars were photographed and published by The Independent, noting the cruelty and barbarity of slavery in America. The film seemed a shoo-in for Oscar season, at least until last year's Oscars. That's when Smith took the stage and slapped Chris Rock after the comedian made a joke about Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. The internationally televised incident left some wondering what Apple would do about releasing the film. Looks like Apple is going for it. In addition to the screening, which featured a discussion with director Fuqua and leading man Smith, Apple has set a release schedule for the film, and yes, it seems to be setting up for award season. Apple TV Plus posted a trailer for the film on YouTube on Monday. It also posted release plans. Those include a run in theaters starting on the 2nd of December, followed by the film's streaming premiere on the 9th of December. The website Screen Daily says a theatrical release among 6 major metros in the U.S. is once again required for Oscar eligibility. And finally today, Apple Music says it is host to 100 million songs. How many can you name? That would be an awesome contest. It's not one Apple is running, though. Rather, Apple issued a press release celebrating that number. 100 million songs. The company points out that when the iPod first premiered, it was borderline insane that you could have 1,000 songs in your pocket. Now, provided you have an Apple Music subscription, you've got 100 million songs in your pocket. 100 million songs, says the release. It's a number that will continue to grow and exponentially multiply, but it's more than just a number, representing something much more significant, the tectonic shift in the business of music making and distribution over these past 2 decades. The release makes mention of Apple Music's human curation and the important role it continues to play. The company also used the release to announce the new Apple Music Today series. Every day, the release says, Apple Music will pick a new song and dive into its history. 8, by the way. I can name 8 songs. Today on the Mac Observer's Day 9. Just thought of another one. Today on the Mac Observer's Daily Observations podcast, TMO Managing Editor Jeff Butts and I are talking iPhone sales and Emancipation. Letting the dust settle on the Daily Observations podcast from the Mac Observer, online at macobserver.com or wherever you get podcasts. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and sponsored by Ladder, smart, dynamic term life insurance. Learn more at ladderlife.com/macOS Ken. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOS Ken. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.